"I sold your car." 4 words, delivered with such casual cruelty that at first I thought I'd misheard my son. "Andrew, what did you say?" My voice sounded strange in the empty kitchen, too high and thin against the background hum of the refrigerator Richard had fixed just 3 weeks before his heart gave out. "The Toyota, Mom. I sold it yesterday. Got $8,000 for it, which is pretty good for a 10-year-old car." The satisfaction in his voice made my stomach clench. "I've already put the money into an account I set up to manage your finances. You need to be practical now that Dad's gone." I gripped the counter to steady myself, staring at the faded wallpaper Richard and I had hung together when we first bought this small house 26 years ago. The Toyota had been Richard's pride, a reliable sedan he'd maintained meticulously, teaching me basic maintenance so I'd never be stranded or taken advantage of by unscrupulous mechanics. "But I need that car for work," I managed to say, trying to keep the panic from my voice. "The hospital is across town. There's no direct bus route." Andrew's sigh crackled through the phone, impatient and dismissive. "Mom, be realistic. You're 58. Should you even be working at your age? Besides, the insurance and maintenance would have been too expensive for you on your own." "On my own?" I repeated, the words feeling foreign in my mouth. Richard had been gone for exactly 17 days, and already my son was treating me like an incompetent child rather than a woman who had supported a family and worked full-time for nearly 40 years. "Look, I've researched the bus routes. It'll take you about an hour and 20 minutes each way with one transfer. Earlier start to your day, but the exercise will be good for you." He spoke with the brisk efficiency he used when closing sales deals. "I'll text you the details." "Gotta run. Meeting in 5. The line went dead before I could respond. I stood motionless in my kitchen, still wearing my hospital scrubs after a 12-hour shift, surrounded by casserole dishes and sympathy cards that had arrived after Richard's funeral. The magnitude of what had just happened slowly sank in. My son had sold my only means of transportation without asking me, without even warning me, and he expected me to be grateful. I sank into a kitchen chair, my legs suddenly unable to support me. Richard would have known exactly what to say, how to handle Andrew's presumptuousness firmly, but without creating a family rift. Richard had always been the buffer between our son's increasingly materialistic outlook and my more traditional values. But Richard wasn't here anymore. The thought brought fresh grief washing over me, a wave so powerful I had to close my eyes against it. When I could breathe again, I reached for my phone to call Margaret, Richard's oldest friend and our family attorney. If anyone would know what to do, it would be Margaret. But my finger hovered over her contact information without pressing. What exactly would I say? That my grown son had sold my car without permission and I didn't know how to stand up to him? The humiliation burned hot in my chest. Instead, I set the phone down and walked to the window overlooking our modest driveway. The empty concrete rectangle where the Toyota had reliably sat for the past decade mocked me with its barrenness. Richard had always parked it at the perfect angle to make it easier for me to back out. The practical implications of Andrew's actions began to cascade through my mind. My shift at the hospital started at 7 a.m. To arrive on time via the bus route Andrew mentioned would mean leaving the house by 5:30 a.m. I'd return home after 8 p.m. on late shifts. In winter, both journeys would be in complete darkness. Then another realization hit me with stunning clarity. The car's title. Richard had been meticulous about paperwork. For our 30th anniversary, he had transferred the Toyota's title solely into my name. "One less thing to worry about if anything happens to me," he'd said at the time. Had Andrew even checked the vehicle's registration before selling it? Did he have any legal right to sell property that wasn't his? I walked quickly to the filing cabinet in the spare bedroom where Richard had kept all our important documents. The vehicle folder was missing. My hands began to shake as I searched more frantically through the neatly labeled sections: insurance, medical, house deed, warranties. The entire automotive section had been removed. Andrew must have taken the documents when he came by last week, ostensibly to help organize Dad's paperwork. I'd been grateful at the time, too overwhelmed with grief and exhaustion to question why he needed to take anything with him. I sank onto the edge of the bed, Richard's side still undisturbed, his reading glasses still on the nightstand. The magnitude of my son's betrayal expanded like a dark stain. This wasn't impulsive. This was calculated. He had deliberately taken the documents, sold a vehicle he had no right to sell, and had the audacity to frame it as helping me. My phone buzzed with an incoming text. Andrew had sent a complicated bus schedule with multiple transfers, not the single transfer he'd mentioned. The journey would actually take closer to 2 hours each way. The final line read, "The exercise and fresh air will be good for you. We need to schedule a time to go through Dad's tools in the garage too. I can probably get a decent price for them." His tools, Richard's beloved tools, collected over 40 years as a mechanic. The tools he had used to teach neighborhood kids basic car maintenance every summer. The tools that were extensions of his skilled, capable hands. Something shifted inside me then, grief transforming into a cold, clear anger I had never experienced before. Richard wouldn't have wanted me to suffer in silence. He would have expected me to stand up for myself. I picked up my phone again, but this time I didn't hesitate. "Margaret," I said when she answered, "I need your help. And I need to know if there's any way to get into the Toyota's glove compartment without having the car." Margaret arrived at my house 40 minutes later, her silver hair pulled back in its usual no-nonsense bun, a leather portfolio tucked under one arm. At 72, she still practiced law part-time, specializing in elder rights and estate planning. She and Richard had been friends since high school, bonding over a shared love of classic cars and justice in equal measure. "He did what?" she demanded after I explained the situation, her voice rising with indignation. She paced my small living room, the floorboards creaking beneath her sensible shoes. "Andrew sold your car without permission? Without even consulting you?" "He says he put the money in an account he set up for me," I explained, hearing how pathetic it sounded, even as the words left my mouth. Margaret's eyes narrowed. "An account you don't control, I'm guessing? One he has access to?" I nodded, shame warming my cheeks. When had I become this person? This doormat that my own son felt comfortable walking all over? Evelyn. Margaret sat beside me on the sofa, taking my hands in hers. "This isn't just inappropriate. It's illegal. The Toyota was in your name, not his. He had no legal right to sell it. He took all the car documents from Richard's filing cabinet," I said. "I think that's why I needed to get into the glove compartment. Richard always kept duplicates of important papers there." A small smile played at the corners of Margaret's mouth. Richard was always prepared for every contingency. "It drove me crazy in court, but it was what made him such a good mechanic." She squeezed my hands. "But there's something else you should know, Evelyn. Something Richard asked me not to tell you until it became necessary." I felt a chill run through me, despite the warm spring evening. "What is it?" "Richard came to see me about 3 months ago. He'd been having some chest pains." "What?" I interrupted, fresh grief and guilt washing over me. "He never told me." "He didn't want to worry you," Margaret said gently. "You know how he was, always protecting everyone else. The doctor had given him some warnings about his heart, and Richard, he wanted to make sure everything was in order, just in case." She opened her portfolio and removed a sealed envelope with my name written on it in Richard's familiar, precise handwriting. "He asked me to give you this if anything happened to him, and if Andrew started behaving exactly as he is now." My hands trembled as I took the envelope. It felt substantial, containing more than just a letter. "Before you open that," Margaret continued, "we need to focus on getting your car back. Do you know who Andrew sold it to?" I shook my head. "He didn't say, just that he got $8,000 for it." Margaret pulled out her phone. "What's the license plate number?" I recited it from memory. Richard had insisted I always know our plate numbers, VIN, and insurance details. Margaret typed rapidly, then looked up with a triumphant smile. "I still have friends at the DMV. Let me make a call." While she stepped into the kitchen to use her phone, I sat holding Richard's envelope, running my fingers over the neat letters of my name. Even now, nearly 3 weeks after his death, discovering something new from him felt like a lifeline thrown across the void that separated us. Margaret returned looking pleased. "The car hasn't been re-registered yet. Whoever bought it hasn't completed the paperwork. That gives us an advantage." She sat beside me again. "Now, about that glove compartment. What exactly do you think is in there?" "I'm not sure," I admitted, but Richard was methodical about backups. He always said the glove compartment was the heart of the car's history. "Well, we're going to get that car back," Margaret declared with the confidence that had made her such a formidable attorney. "But first, I think you should read what Richard wanted you to know." With a deep breath, I carefully opened the envelope. Inside was a letter and what appeared to be a small safe deposit box key. "My dearest Evelyn, If you're reading this, two things have happened. I'm no longer with you, and Andrew has started making decisions he has no right to make. I've known for some time that our son has developed values very different from ours. While we raised him to respect people regardless of their wealth or status, he's chosen to measure worth only in dollars and appearances. I've prepared for this possibility. The key enclosed opens safe deposit box U-247 at First National on Broadway. Inside, you'll find everything you need to understand what I've been building for us over the past 30 years. But there's something even more important in the Toyota's glove compartment, something Andrew must never find. It contains proof of everything, plus an envelope you'll need to take to Margaret immediately. I'm sorry I kept secrets from you, my love. I wanted to protect you from worrying, and I wanted to be sure everything was perfectly in place before I shared it all. I thought I had more time. Know that every decision I made was out of love for you, and hope for Andrew to eventually become the man we raised him to be, not the man he currently is. All my love, always, Richard. I looked up at Margaret, tears blurring my vision. What was he building for us? What secrets? Margaret's expression was gentle but determined. I think we need to get that car back to find out, and I have an idea how to do it. She pulled out her phone again. First, I'm going to report the vehicle as stolen, which legally it was. Then I'm calling my grandson. He works at the DMV and can tell us exactly who tried to register the title transfer. Won't Andrew get in trouble? Despite everything, he was still my son. Margaret gave me a level look. Evelyn, Richard was my best friend for over 50 years. He spent his entire life making sure you were taken care of. If Andrew has interfered with that, then yes, he deserves whatever consequences come his way. As Margaret made her calls, I reread Richard's letter, my fingers tracing his handwriting, hearing his voice in every carefully chosen word. Whatever was in that glove compartment, whatever Richard had been building for us, it was clearly something he felt would protect me after he was gone. And Andrew had unknowingly sold it along with the car. By the time Margaret finished her calls, night had fallen. She looked satisfied as she returned to the living room. Good news. The car was sold to a dentist in Boulder, Dr. Paul Mercer. He bought it for his daughter as a college graduation present. It's still sitting in his garage. They won't pick it up until the weekend. She sat beside me, looking more energized than I'd seen her since Richard's funeral. We're going to Boulder first thing tomorrow morning. I've already left a message with Dr. Mercer explaining the situation. What did you tell him? The truth. That your recently widowed status was exploited by someone who illegally sold your vehicle without permission? She patted my hand. Don't worry. I didn't throw Andrew under the bus completely. I simply explained that a family member exceeded their authority during a time of grief. I nodded, grateful for her tact, even as I struggled with the painful reality of my son's betrayal. Now, Margaret continued, get some rest. Tomorrow we retrieve your car and find out what Richard was protecting in that glove compartment. As she left, I stood in the doorway watching her headlights disappear down the street. For the first time since Richard's death, I felt something besides grief stirring inside me. A quiet determination, a spark of the strength he had always seen in me, even when I couldn't see it myself. Whatever was in that glove compartment, I knew one thing for certain. Richard had left me the tools to stand on my own against whatever came next, even if that whatever turned out to be my own son. The drive to Boulder the next morning felt surreal. Margaret insisted on driving, saying I looked too exhausted to be behind the wheel. I couldn't argue. I'd barely slept, my mind racing with questions about what Richard could have hidden in the Toyota's glove compartment that was so important. Did Richard ever mention investments to you? Margaret asked as we left Denver behind, the Rocky Mountains rising majestically before us. Not really, I replied, watching the familiar landscape roll by. He had his pension from the auto shop, and we had some modest savings. He always handled our finances. I felt a flush of embarrassment at this admission. How little I'd paid attention to our financial matters, content to let Richard manage everything. Margaret nodded thoughtfully. Richard was always more shrewd than people gave him credit for. Mechanics understand systems, how small parts work together to create something powerful. He applied that thinking to everything. The suburban sprawl of Denver gradually gave way to the more open approach to Boulder. We pulled up to an impressive house in a well-established neighborhood, the kind of place that spoke of old money and quiet prosperity. Dr. Mercer was waiting for us in his driveway, a tall man with kind eyes and a concerned expression. Beside him stood a young woman I assumed was his daughter, looking uncomfortable in the morning sunlight. "Mrs. Winters," he greeted me, extending his hand. "I'm so sorry about this situation. Had I known the circumstances of the sale, I never would have purchased the vehicle." "Thank you for understanding," I replied, shaking his hand. "I hope this hasn't caused too much inconvenience." "Not at all," he assured me, though his daughter's expression suggested otherwise. Amber was excited about the car, but clearly this takes precedence. "I've brought the paperwork confirming Mrs. Winters' legal ownership," Margaret interjected, all business as she handed him a folder. "And a cashier's check for the full amount you paid." Dr. Mercer glanced at the documents briefly, then shook his head. "Keep the money, Mrs. Winters. This was an illegal sale. I couldn't in good conscience accept payment." "Dad!" his daughter protested, but fell silent at his stern look. "Consider it my contribution to setting things right," he continued. "I lost my wife 3 years ago. I understand how vulnerable that time can be." His kindness brought unexpected tears to my eyes. "Thank you," I managed. "The car's in the garage," he said, leading us around the side of the house. I was impressed by its condition. "Whoever maintained it did an exceptional job." "My husband," I said softly. "He was a mechanic." Dr. Mercer nodded appreciatively as he opened the garage door. And there it was, our Toyota, looking exactly as it had when it sat in our driveway for all those years. The sight of it, this tangible connection to Richard, made my heart clench. "The keys," Dr. Mercer said, handing them to me. "Everything should be as it was when I purchased it." I thanked him again, and after a few more formalities guided by Margaret's legal expertise, we were in the Toyota heading back toward Denver. I sat in the driver's seat, breathing in the familiar scent that still held traces of Richard's aftershave. "Are you going to open it?" Margaret asked, nodding toward the glove compartment. My hands trembled slightly as I pressed the button. The compartment opened smoothly, revealing several neatly organized items: the car's manual, registration documents, and a sealed manila envelope with "For Evelyn, urgent," written across it in Richard's handwriting. "Should I hesitated, glancing at the road ahead. "Pull over," Margaret suggested. "Whatever's in there, you'll want to give it your full attention." I found a scenic overlook just outside Boulder and parked, the mountains providing a majestic backdrop to this moment of truth. With a deep breath, I opened the envelope. Inside was a USB drive, a letter, and several legal documents. I unfolded the letter first. "Evelyn, if you're reading this, I'm gone, and something has happened that made you need to retrieve these documents urgently. I'm guessing it involves Andrew. He's been showing concerning signs for years now, becoming more focused on appearances and status than the values we tried to teach him." The enclosed USB drive contains complete records of what I'm about to explain. The short version is this. For the past 30 years, I've been investing in real estate throughout Denver. What began as a small opportunity with my first bonus at the auto shop has grown into something substantial. Very substantial. The properties are all held by Winter Mechanics LLC, a company registered solely in your name, though I've managed it. The portfolio currently includes 17 residential properties and 4 commercial buildings, including the Aspen Heights luxury apartments. I gasped, looking up at Margaret. "Aspen Heights? That's where Andrew lives." She nodded, unsurprised. "Keep reading." "Yes, Evelyn, our son has been paying $2,800 monthly rent to a company you own without realizing it. I never told him because I wanted him to make his own way, not rely on family connections for special treatment. The total portfolio value as of last month was approximately $4.7 million, with monthly income of $78,000 after expenses and management fees. All of this is yours. Everything is already in your name legally. My attorney Margaret has all the necessary documentation at her office, but I kept these backups in case Andrew tried to interfere after my death. I've seen how he looks at the house, at your car, at my tools, calculating their value rather than their meaning. The management company that handles day-to-day operations is Reliable Properties. Ask for Susan Chen. She's expecting your call if something happens to me. The password for the USB drive is Evelyn9964 Winter. I'm sorry I kept this from you. I wanted to surprise you when I finally retired next year. We were going to travel, donate to those mechanics scholarships we always talked about, live the life we'd worked so hard for. Remember how strong you are, my love, how capable. You've always been the heart of our family, And now you have the resources to live exactly as you choose. All my love, Richard. I stared at the letter, reading it 3 times to make sure I understood. The modest life we'd lived, the careful budgeting, Richard's insistence on handling the finances, all while he built a multi-million-dollar real estate empire. For us, for me. You knew, I said to Margaret, not accusingly, but with sudden understanding. She nodded. I helped him set it up legally. He swore me to secrecy until you needed to know. She smiled sadly. Richard wanted to protect you from Andrew's increasingly materialistic outlook. He saw it coming years ago, how Andrew might try to control you financially after Richard was gone. I looked down at the other documents in the envelope, property deeds, account statements, contact information. All evidence of a life Richard had built in parallel to the one we shared openly. Why wouldn't he tell me? I whispered, emotions colliding inside me. Gratitude, confusion, grief, love. He wanted to handle all the complex parts first, Margaret explained gently. Make it turnkey for you. And honestly, Evelyn, he worried you might let something slip to Andrew before everything was properly secured. The truth of this stung, but I couldn't deny it. I had always made excuses for Andrew's behavior, always tried to see the best in him, even as Richard grew increasingly concerned about his values. What do I do now? I asked, feeling overwhelmed by this new reality. Margaret's expression turned determined. First, we secure these documents in my office safe. Then we call Susan at the management company. And then, she added with a gleam in her eye, we decide exactly how you want to handle Andrew. I looked out at the mountains Richard and I had hiked so many times over our decades together, feeling his presence more strongly than at any moment since his death. He had built all this for me, created security and independence I never knew I had. And Andrew had tried to send me on a 2-hour bus commute, selling my car without permission, planning to sell Richard's beloved tools for quick cash. For the first time since Richard's death, I felt something beyond grief taking root inside me. Determination, strength, a clarity of purpose that would have made my husband proud. Let's go, I said, starting the Toyota's engine. We have work to do. Margaret's office was nothing like the sleek corporate spaces Andrew frequented. Housed in a converted Victorian near downtown Denver, it featured worn leather furniture, floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, and a distinct absence of pretension. Yet as I sat across from her desk, watching her secure Richard's documents in an old-fashioned safe, I understood that real power often resided in such unassuming places. Susan Chen is expecting your call, Margaret said, handing me her office phone. I suggest putting it on speaker so I can help with any technical questions. Susan answered on the second ring, her voice crisp and professional. Mrs. Winters, I've been expecting your call. Let me first say how sorry I am about Richard's passing. He was an exceptional man. Thank you, I replied, surprised by her genuine tone. I'm just learning about everything. Of course, Richard arranged for a complete briefing whenever you were ready. Would you prefer to meet in person? We scheduled a meeting for the following morning, and after ending the call, I turned to Margaret with the question that had been burning in my mind. Did everyone know about this except me? Her expression softened. Not everyone. Richard compartmentalized carefully. Susan knows you own the properties but doesn't know you weren't actively involved. The tenants only know Reliable Properties as their management company. The only people who knew the full situation were Richard, myself, and my associate who helped with the legal structures. I nodded, trying to process the magnitude of what Richard had built while maintaining our modest daily life. All those evenings he spent helping friends with car troubles. He was often inspecting properties or meeting with contractors, Margaret confirmed. He hated misleading you, Evelyn, but he wanted everything perfect before the reveal. My phone buzzed with a text from Andrew. Checked on you this morning, but you weren't home. Remember, doctor said to take it easy. I've listed Dad's tools on an auction site. Should fetch good prices. The casual presumption that he had the right to sell Richard's beloved tools, that he needed to monitor my whereabouts, that I required management rather than respect, ignited something in me that had been smoldering since his call about the car. What are you going to do about Andrew? Margaret asked, noticing my expression. I considered the question carefully. The revelations of the day had shifted everything, transforming me from the grieving widow Andrew thought he could control into the owner of the very apartment building where he lived. The power dynamic had completely reversed, yet wielding that power carelessly would make me no better than him. I need time to think, I said finally. This isn't just about teaching Andrew a lesson. It's about helping him become the person Richard and I raised him to be, not who he's chosen to become. Margaret smiled approvingly. Richard always said you were the moral compass of the family. That afternoon, I returned home with the Toyota parked proudly in its usual spot. I half expected Andrew to call immediately, demanding explanations, but my phone remained silent. Either he hadn't discovered the car's return, or he was formulating his response. I used the quiet hours to explore the USB drive Richard had left, entering the password on my laptop with trembling fingers. The drive contained meticulous records of every property purchase, renovation, rental income, and investment decision over 3 decades. Spreadsheets showed how Richard had started with a single small rental house purchased for $42,000 in 1992, gradually building the portfolio through careful reinvestment of profits. What struck me most were the personal notes Richard had included with each property file, his hopes for how each investment would improve our future, observations about neighborhood developments, even sketches for renovations he'd designed himself. This wasn't just a financial enterprise. It was a labor of love. One folder was simply labeled Evelyn's Dreams. Inside were detailed plans for all the things we'd talked about doing someday, when we could afford them. Traveling to Italy to see the art I'd always admired, establishing scholarships for young mechanics from underprivileged backgrounds, renovating our modest house while keeping its character intact. Richard had been actively planning for these dreams to become reality. Tears streamed down my face as I realized the depth of his love and foresight. While I'd assumed we would always live our modest, comfortable life until traditional retirement, Richard had been building a different future, one where financial constraints wouldn't limit our ability to make a difference or enjoy our later years. The doorbell interrupted my emotional exploration. I closed the laptop and wiped my eyes before opening the door to find Andrew standing on the porch, his expression a mixture of anger and confusion. "The car is back," he stated flatly, looking past me toward the kitchen as if expecting to find answers there. "Want to explain how that happened?" I took a deep breath, channeling the strength I'd felt in Margaret's office. "I think you're the one who owes me an explanation, Andrew. You sold property that wasn't yours to sell." He blinked, momentarily thrown by my direct approach. This wasn't the acquiescent mother he was accustomed to. "I was trying to help you streamline, Mom. That car was too expensive for you to maintain on your own. The car that Dad maintained himself at minimal cost? The car that's fully paid for? That car?" I held his gaze steadily. Andrew shifted uncomfortably. "The insurance alone is $63 per month," I finished for him. "Well within my budget, as you would know if you'd bothered to ask instead of making decisions about my life without my input." "Look," he said, adopting the condescending tone he often used when he thought he was being patient. "You're grieving. You're not thinking clearly about practical matters. Dad always handled the finances, and now I'm handling them," I interrupted firmly, starting with reclaiming my illegally sold vehicle. His face flushed. "How did you even know who bought it? I never told you. I have resources you don't know about, Andrew." The statement was mild, but landed with unexpected weight. "Now, I believe you've also listed your father's tools for sale without consulting me?" "They're just gathering dust in the garage," he protested. "They could fetch a few $1,000s that you need more than sentimental clutter." Each dismissive word about Richard's prized possessions, the tools that had supported our family for decades, strengthened my resolve. But I maintained my composure, remembering that my goal wasn't to punish Andrew, but to correct his course. "I need you to remove those listings immediately," I said calmly. "Those tools are not for sale, and we need to have a longer conversation about boundaries and respect, but not today. I have an early meeting tomorrow." "A meeting? What meeting?" The confusion on his face might have been comical under different circumstances, the idea that his mother might have important business apparently inconceivable to him. "That's not your concern," I replied simply. "But I do need the details of the account where you deposited the money from selling my car. Since you've been reimbursed by the buyer, that money belongs to me." Andrew stared at me as if I'd started speaking a foreign language. "Mom, what's gotten into you? Since when do you talk like this?" "Since I decided to honor your father's memory by standing up for myself," I answered truthfully. "Now, the account details, please." Something in my tone must have conveyed that I wouldn't be backing down. After a moment of tense silence, Andrew pulled out his phone, forwarded the account information to me, and left with a confused backward glance that suggested he was reevaluating everything he thought he knew about his grieving, supposedly helpless mother. As I watched him drive away in his luxury SUV, I felt neither triumph nor vindication, only a calm certainty that I was finally standing in my own power, exactly as Richard had always seen me. Tomorrow would bring the meeting with Susan Chen and a fuller understanding of my new reality, but today had already brought something equally valuable, the first step toward reclaiming not just my car, but my voice. Reliable Properties occupied the entire top floor of a brick building in downtown Denver. I felt distinctly out of place as I rode the elevator up in my simple navy dress, the one I'd worn to Richard's funeral. Margaret had offered to accompany me, but this felt like something I needed to do alone. My first step into the new life Richard had prepared for me. Susan Chen met me at the elevator doors. She was younger than I'd expected, perhaps mid-40s, with an efficient demeanor softened by genuine warmth in her eyes. "Mrs. Winters," she greeted me, extending her hand. "It's a pleasure to finally meet you in person. Richard spoke of you often, and with great admiration." I followed her through a modern office space where a dozen or so employees worked at sleek desks. None of them gave me a second glance, just another client visiting their boss. If only they knew I owned the company that employed them. Susan's corner office offered panoramic views of downtown Denver and the mountains beyond. She gestured for me to take a seat at a small conference table where folders were already arranged in neat stacks. "Richard prepared extensively for this transition," she explained, sitting across from me. "He updated these briefing materials every quarter, ensuring you would have current information whenever it became necessary." I nodded, unable to speak past the sudden tightness in my throat. Even in death, Richard was taking care of me, anticipating my needs before I knew them myself. "Where would you like to begin?" Susan asked gently. "With an overview, I suppose," I managed. "I'm still trying to comprehend the scope of all this." She opened the first folder, revealing a map of Denver with properties highlighted in different colors. The Winter Mechanics portfolio currently includes 17 residential properties and 4 commercial buildings spread strategically across the metropolitan area. For the next 2 hours, Susan walked me through each property: purchase dates, renovation histories, current occupancy rates, rental incomes, and future potential. The residential properties ranged from a 4-unit building purchased in the early days to the crown jewel, Aspen Heights, the luxury apartment complex where Andrew lived. Aspen Heights generates the most revenue, Susan explained. 32 units, all premium priced, with a consistent 98% occupancy rate. Your son's unit, 14B, is one of our largest 2-bedrooms. "Does Andrew know who owns the building?" I asked, though I already suspected the answer. "No. All tenants deal directly with Reliable Properties. The ownership structure, your ownership, is not disclosed." She hesitated. "Richard was quite specific about maintaining that separation, especially regarding your son." I nodded, understanding Richard's reasoning better now. Andrew's respect had become increasingly tied to perceptions of wealth and status over the years. Learning his mother owned his luxury apartment building would have fundamentally altered our relationship, perhaps not for the better. "And the commercial properties?" I prompted. Susan turned to another section of the briefing materials. 4 total, including this building's top 3 floors. The most significant is Riverside Plaza downtown, a mixed-use development with retail on the ground floor and offices above. My head swam with the magnitude of it all. While I'd been working shifts at the hospital, living our modest life in our modest home, Richard had been quietly building an empire that now generated more monthly income than I'd earned in my best years as a nursing assistant. "Richard set everything up to run smoothly without requiring your direct involvement," Susan continued. "Reliable Properties handles all day-to-day operations, maintenance, tenant relations, rent collection. Our quarterly management fee is 8% of gross rental income, slightly below market rate." "And my role in all this?" I asked. "As owner, you have final authority on major decisions, property acquisitions or sales, significant renovations, rent adjustments beyond standard annual increases." She smiled. "But as Richard often said, the beauty of the system is that it doesn't require your constant attention unless you want to be more involved." By the time we finished reviewing the materials, afternoon light slanted through the windows. Susan closed the final folder and looked at me expectantly. It's overwhelming, I admitted. Understandably so. Richard built something remarkable, but he did it incrementally over decades. She hesitated before adding, he was so excited about finally sharing it with you. He'd planned a surprise trip to Italy next year, where he was going to tell you everything. Italy, where I'd always dreamed of seeing the Renaissance art I'd only experienced through books and documentaries. The trip had been on my someday list for our entire marriage. There's one more thing, Susan said, reaching into her desk drawer. She pulled out a small box and handed it to me. Richard left this with me about a month ago. He said if anything happened to him, I should give it to you during our first meeting. The box was wrapped in simple blue paper, my favorite color. With trembling fingers, I removed the wrapping to find a jewelry box inside. Opening it revealed a beautiful gold pendant in the shape of a key, studded with small diamonds. A note tucked inside read, "You've always held the key to my heart. Now you hold the keys to our future. Use them wisely, my love." Richard's tears blurred my vision as I fastened the necklace around my neck. It felt both like a final gift and a passing of responsibility, Richard entrusting me with the fruits of his decades of careful work. "What would you like to do next?" Susan asked, after giving me a moment to compose myself. The question hung in the air, pregnant with possibilities I'd never imagined having. I could sell everything and travel the world. I could move into a luxury apartment like Andrew's. I could donate to causes Richard and I had always supported, but could never afford to help substantially. But as the initial shock began to fade, one thought crystallized with perfect clarity. Richard hadn't built all this just for financial security. He'd created options, the freedom to make choices based on values rather than necessity. "I need time to process everything," I said finally. "But there is one immediate matter. My son, Andrew, the tenant in 14B at Aspen Heights." Susan nodded, her expression carefully neutral. "Yes, I understand his lease is month to month." When she confirmed this, I continued, "I'd like to review the terms, and I'd like to know if there have been any issues with him as a tenant." Susan hesitated before answering. "Your son has been prompt with payments. However, there have been multiple complaints from neighbors about noise, parking violations, and what the building manager described as a generally entitled attitude toward staff. This didn't surprise me. Andrew had always expected special treatment, a tendency that had only worsened as his career in sales advanced. "I see," I said, my decision solidifying. "Please don't make any changes to his situation yet, but I would like to schedule a property tour of Aspen Heights tomorrow, if possible. As the new active owner, I should familiarize myself with all the properties, starting with the most significant." Susan's slight smile suggested she understood perfectly what I was considering. "Of course, Mrs. Winters. I'll arrange everything. The building manager, Mr. Patel, will be delighted to show you around." As I left Reliable Properties that afternoon, the gold key pendant resting against my chest, I felt a strange mixture of grief and possibility. Richard was gone, but he'd left me with more than just financial assets. He'd given me the power to reshape relationships that had become distorted over time, particularly with our son. The question now was how best to use that power, not for revenge or petty satisfaction, but for something Richard would have valued more, helping Andrew find his way back to the values we'd tried to instill in him throughout his childhood. Tomorrow's visit to Aspen Heights would be the first step in a careful recalibration that had been long overdue. Aspen Heights stood in one of Denver's trendiest neighborhoods, its sleek glass and steel facade reflecting the morning sunlight. As I parked the Toyota in the visitors section, deliberately choosing to drive myself rather than arrive in the company car Susan had offered, I tried to see the building through fresh eyes. This wasn't just my son's apartment complex anymore. It was my property, part of Richard's legacy to me. The lobby featured marble floors, a waterfall wall, and staff dressed in crisp uniforms. Raj Patel, the building manager, greeted me with professional courtesy, showing no indication that Susan had revealed my ownership status. To him, I was simply a company representative touring the property. Aspen Heights maintains a 98% occupancy rate with minimal turnover, he explained as we entered the elevator. Our amenities include a rooftop pool, fitness center with yoga studio, business center, and 24-hour concierge service. I nodded, absorbing details about my own property that I'd never known. And the tenants? What's the demographic? Primarily young professionals and executives, Raj replied. Average age 35 to 45. Average income in the upper six figures. Many work in finance, tech, or healthcare administration. The world Andrew had aspired to join, where value was measured in income brackets and job titles. As we toured the immaculate fitness center and the stunning rooftop pool area, I couldn't help wondering what Richard had thought, watching our son embrace these superficial values while distancing himself from the principles we'd raised him with. "We've prepared a vacant unit for your inspection," Raj continued, leading me down a hallway on the 14th floor. "It's identical in layout to units 14A through D." I hesitated. "Actually, I'd like to see 14B specifically." A flicker of something, concern, discomfort, crossed Raj's face. "14B is currently occupied, Mrs. Winters. We don't typically enter tenant units without proper notice unless there's an emergency." "I understand," I assured him. "I don't need to enter. I'd just like to verify its location relative to other units." Raj relaxed slightly. "Of course, it's this way." He led me down another pristine hallway to a door marked 14B. Andrew's home, the luxury apartment he'd been so proud to secure 2 years ago, making a point of mentioning its exclusivity and waitlist whenever conversation allowed. "There have been some concerns regarding this particular tenant," Raj said carefully, keeping his voice low. "What kind of concerns?" He hesitated, clearly uncomfortable discussing tenant issues with someone he perceived as company management. "Nothing that violates lease terms explicitly. Noise complaints occasionally. Some issues with guest parking. A tendency to expect exceptions to building policies." I nodded, unsurprised. Andrew had always believed rules were flexible for people of certain status, a perspective that had intensified as his sales career advanced. "And how does the tenant respond when these concerns are raised?" I asked. "Typically with promises to comply, followed by temporary improvement before the behaviors resume," Raj replied diplomatically. "We've documented everything according to company policy." As we continued our tour, viewing the business center where young professionals worked on laptops and the elegant community room available for resident functions, I considered what I'd learned. Andrew wasn't just living beyond his means financially. He was bringing the same entitled attitude to his home life that he'd displayed in selling my car and planning to sell Richard's tools. After completing the tour and thanking Raj for his time, I sat in my car in the visitor parking area, contemplating my next steps. Through the lobby windows, I could see residents coming and going, some in business attire heading to work, others in casual clothes walking designer dogs. All of them living in a building I owned, including my son, who believed his mother needed to take the bus to work. The irony might have been amusing if it weren't so painfully revealing of how far Andrew had strayed from the values Richard and I had tried to instill. My phone buzzed with a text from Andrew. "Notice the car is back. We need to talk about your financial situation. Dinner at my place tonight? 7 p.m.? The presumption in his tone was nothing new, but my perspective had shifted dramatically. This wasn't my successful son generously offering guidance to his struggling mother. This was a man who had illegally sold my property, now assuming he could continue managing my life without consequences. I texted back, "I'll be there at 7. And yes, we definitely need to talk." That afternoon, I met with Margaret to update her on what I'd learned from Susan and my tour of Aspen Heights. Her office felt like a sanctuary of straight talk after the carefully diplomatic language of the corporate world. "So, what's your plan for tonight?" she asked after I'd filled her in. "Going to drop the property ownership bomb immediately, or build up to it?" "Neither," I replied, surprising myself with the clarity of my decision. "I'm not going to tell him yet." Margaret raised an eyebrow. "Oh?" "Andrew needs to understand something more fundamental first, that his behavior toward me has been unacceptable regardless of my financial situation." I twisted Richard's key pendant between my fingers as I spoke. "If I tell him about the properties now, he'll change his behavior because I'm wealthy, not because he respects me." "Richard would approve," Margaret said with a smile. "He always said you saw people more clearly than anyone he knew." "I failed to see how Andrew was changing," I admitted. "Or perhaps I saw but didn't want to acknowledge it. We all have blind spots where our children are concerned," Margaret said gently. "The question is, what you do once your eyes are opened." By the time I arrived at Aspen Heights that evening, I had a clear plan, not for revenge or dramatic revelation, but for beginning the more challenging process of helping Andrew reconnect with values he'd abandoned in pursuit of status and appearance. The concierge greeted me politely, checking my name against the visitors list before directing me to the elevators. As I rode up to the 14th floor, I touched the key pendant at my throat, drawing strength from this tangible connection to Richard. Whatever happened next, I would face it with the dignity and purpose he had always seen in me, even when I couldn't see it in myself. Andrew's apartment was exactly what I'd expected: sleek, impersonal, and carefully curated to project success. Floor-to-ceiling windows showcased downtown Denver's glittering skyline. Designer furniture arranged for appearance rather than comfort, and conspicuously placed status symbols throughout. An expensive watch collection, displayed in a glass case, framed photos of Andrew with minor celebrities at charity events, a wine refrigerator stocked with bottles I knew cost more than I'd spent on groceries in a month. "Mom, right on time," he greeted me, air-kissing my cheek. He was dressed casually in what I recognized as premium athleisure wear, the kind advertised in glossy magazines for people who wanted to look effortlessly wealthy even in relaxation. "I ordered dinner from Bellini's. Hope you like Italian." "That sounds lovely," I replied, noting that he hadn't cooked himself. Richard had always insisted on preparing meals from scratch when we had guests, believing food made with personal effort carried more meaning than anything purchased. Andrew poured wine into crystal glasses, handing one to me before gesturing toward the living room. "Let's sit. We have important things to discuss." I took a seat on the uncomfortable but visually striking sofa, looking around with new awareness. My son lived in a property I owned, surrounded by luxury items purchased on credit, while believing his recently widowed mother couldn't afford car insurance. "I see you got the car back somehow," he began, his tone suggesting I'd done something mildly amusing, but ultimately misguided. "Care to explain how that happened?" "The buyer returned it when he learned it had been sold illegally," I replied simply, "without my permission or authority." Andrew waved this off. "A technicality. I was handling it for you, saving you the hassle. By sending me on a 2-hour bus commute to work?" I kept my voice steady, not accusatory but matter-of-fact. "Mom, be realistic. You can't afford to maintain that car on your nurse's aide salary. Dad always handled the finances, the maintenance, everything. I'm just stepping up to help now that he's gone." There it was, the fundamental assumption underlying his behavior. That without Richard, I was incapable of managing my own affairs, that his judgment automatically superseded mine because of his perceived financial superiority. "I appreciate your concern," I said carefully, "but I didn't ask for that kind of help. What I need from you is respect for my autonomy and my property." Andrew sighed with exaggerated patience. "This is exactly why we need to talk. You're not thinking practically. Grief is affecting your judgment." He leaned forward, adopting the same tone he likely used with difficult clients. "I've put together a financial plan for you. It involves selling the house, it's too big for you alone anyway, and moving into a senior living community." "Senior living?" I repeated, genuinely startled. "I'm 58, Andrew. I'm not ready for a retirement community." "It's not just for elderly people," he explained condescendingly. "It's for individuals who need a more supportive environment. No home maintenance, planned activities, transportation services." The doorbell interrupted what was clearly a rehearsed pitch. Andrew excused himself to accept the food delivery, returning with several containers of upscale Italian takeout. As he plated pasta and salad with practiced efficiency, I considered how to proceed. The temptation to reveal my financial situation immediately, to see the shock on his face when he realized I owned this very building, was strong but ultimately unproductive. "I've already found a suitable community," Andrew continued as we began eating. "Morningside Gardens. It's modest but adequate for your needs. The sale of the house should cover the entry fee, and your pension will handle the monthly costs if you're careful." I set down my fork. "And what about what I want, Andrew? Have you considered that at all?" He looked genuinely confused. "I'm doing this for you, Mom, so you don't have to worry about money or maintenance or transportation. By selling my home out from under me? By getting rid of my car without permission? By planning to sell Dad's tools?" I kept my voice calm, but firm. "Those aren't helpful actions. They're controlling ones." Andrew's expression hardened. "Someone needs to take control. You're clearly not equipped to handle these decisions." "Based on what evidence?" I challenged quietly. My 35-year career? My mortgage that's been paid on time every month for 26 years? The fact that Dad and I raised you, put you through college, and did it all without ever carrying credit card debt? He flushed slightly. That was different. Dad was handling things. We were partners, I corrected. We made decisions together based on shared values and priorities. Andrew's phone chimed with an incoming text. He glanced at it and frowned. It's from the property management company. Apparently there's a building inspection scheduled for tomorrow. Inconvenient timing. The irony nearly made me smile. My building inspection, scheduled with Raj during my tour earlier, was already causing ripples in Andrew's carefully controlled world. About those tools, I said, redirecting the conversation. I've removed your online listings. They're not for sale. His eyes widened in surprise, then narrowed. How did you even know how to do that? And why? They're just collecting dust. They were your father's livelihood for 40 years. The tools that paid for your education, your first car, the down payment on your first condo. I met his gaze steadily. They have value beyond what they might fetch at auction. Sentimental value doesn't pay bills, Mom. And what bills are so pressing that we need to sell Richard's tools immediately? I asked. The mortgage is current. The utilities are on auto-pay. I have health insurance through the hospital. What financial emergency are you solving? Andrew seemed momentarily at a loss, unused to being challenged on his financial pronouncements. It's about planning ahead, creating a cushion, being practical. Or is it about control? I suggested gently. About making decisions for me because you've decided I can't make them for myself? The direct question hung in the air between us. Andrew took a long sip of his wine before answering. I'm trying to help you, he said finally, his tone suggesting he was speaking to someone slightly dim-witted. Dad asked me to look out for you before he died. This caught me by surprise. He said that specifically? Well, not in those exact words, Andrew hedged, but he knew you'd need guidance with financial matters. He always handled everything. I thought of the extensive documentation Richard had left, the careful preparations he'd made to ensure I would have not just financial security, but complete independence. The contrast between what Richard had actually done and what Andrew claimed he'd wanted couldn't have been starker. I think I knew your father better than you did, I said quietly, and I don't believe that's what he wanted at all. Andrew's expression hardened. This is exactly what I was afraid of. You're being emotional rather than practical. This is why I took initiative with the car. That initiative was illegal, I reminded him. The car was in my name only. You had no legal right to sell it. A technicality, he dismissed again. Family helps family. I'm trying to secure your future. I studied my son across the table, this person I'd raised, but somehow failed to instill with the values Richard and I had lived by. The realization was painful, but necessary. Andrew wouldn't hear me as long as he saw me as financially inferior and therefore less worthy of respect or autonomy. I appreciate dinner, I said, rising from the table. But I think we should continue this conversation another time when we're both willing to listen to each other. Andrew looked startled. You're leaving? We haven't finished discussing the senior living arrangements. There's nothing to discuss, I replied firmly. I'm not selling my home or moving to Morningside Gardens. Those decisions are mine to make, not yours. As I gathered my purse, Andrew's expression shifted from surprise to condescension. Mom, be reasonable. You can't manage alone. The yard work, the maintenance, the finances. It's too much. I paused at the door, turning back to face him. I've been managing just fine, Andrew, and I'll continue to do so. The question isn't whether I can handle my life without your father. It's whether you can handle the fact that I don't need your control disguised as help. His face flushed with anger, but I left before he could respond, walking calmly to the elevator with a strange sense of lightness. For the first time since Richard's death, I had stood my ground completely, not just about the car or the tools, but about my fundamental right to direct my own life. As I drove home in the Toyota Richard had maintained so carefully, I realized tonight had been an important test, not of Andrew, but of myself. I had faced my son's attempts to control me without revealing the financial power I now held. I had asserted my autonomy based on principle rather than position. Richard would have been proud. And tomorrow, when Raj Patel conducted his inspection of Unit 14B, would bring a subtle but significant shift in the dynamics between mother and son, one Andrew wouldn't even recognize until much later. The game had changed, but only I knew the new rules. The building inspection notification had clearly rattled Andrew more than he wanted to admit. He called 3 times the following morning, each message more agitated than the last. "Mom, this inspection is ridiculous. They've never done one before. They're asking to check everything. Plumbing, electrical, even closet spaces. It's invasive. Can you believe they're threatening lease violations if I don't comply? I pay premium rent for this place." I let the calls go to voicemail, focusing instead on my meeting with Susan Chen. We sat in her office reviewing the property portfolios with special attention to Aspen Heights. "The inspection is standard procedure when ownership changes hands," Susan explained. "We're conducting them at all properties to give you a comprehensive understanding of current conditions." "And has my son been notified it's a change of ownership inspection?" I asked. "No. Tenants are simply informed it's a building-wide assessment. Your ownership remains confidential, as per the protocols Richard established." I nodded, satisfied. "And Raj understands to treat Unit 14B exactly like all others? No special attention, positive or negative?" "Absolutely. He's our most professional manager, completely discreet." By afternoon, I was back at my modest home, tending to Richard's garden while listening to increasingly frustrated voicemails from Andrew. The final one came at 3:17 p.m., his tone shifting from annoyed to alarmed. "Mom, you won't believe this. The building manager just cited me for 3 lease violations: unauthorized modifications to the thermostat system, excessive noise complaints, and improper storage in the fire exit stairwell. They're threatening to revoke my lease if I don't address everything within 2 weeks. This is ridiculous. I know the owner of the management company through work. I'm going to have someone's job over this." I set down my gardening tools, brushing soil from my hands as I considered this development. I hadn't instructed Raj to find violations, but I wasn't surprised he had. Andrew had always considered rules to be flexible guidelines that didn't fully apply to him. My phone rang again. Margaret this time. "Your son just called my office," she said without preamble. "He wants me to draft a complaint letter to Reliable Properties about harassment and selective enforcement. Apparently there's been an inspection." I couldn't help laughing. "Did you tell him you represent me? Not him?" "I simply said I'd need to check for conflicts of interest before I could advise him," which is technically true. Her tone turned serious. "How long are you planning to maintain this charade, Evelyn? The longer it continues, the more complicated the eventual revelation becomes." She had a point. My initial instinct to withhold information about my ownership of Andrew's building had made sense as a way to assess his attitude without the complicating factor of my newfound wealth. But extending the deception much longer might undermine the ultimate goal, helping Andrew reconnect with values beyond material success and status. "I'll tell him soon," I promised. "But I need him to understand something fundamental first, that his behavior has been unacceptable regardless of my financial situation." "Well, he's certainly getting a taste of his own medicine with this inspection business," Margaret observed. "Sometimes natural consequences are the most effective teachers." After we hung up, I checked my watch. Andrew would be finishing work soon. It was time for the next phase of what I'd begun to think of as Operation Perspective Adjustment. I drove to Aspen Heights, timing my arrival to coincide with the end of Raj's workday. He greeted me professionally in the lobby, offering a leather portfolio. "The complete inspection report for Unit 14B, Mrs. Winters, as requested. I've highlighted the actual violations versus the cosmetic issues." "Thank you, Raj." "And the tenant's response?" "Initially argumentative, followed by attempts to establish social connections that might override the violations. Raj's neutral expression didn't change, but a slight tightening around his eyes suggested this wasn't an unusual experience with Andrew. When those proved unsuccessful, he indicated he would address the issues under protest. I nodded, unsurprised. "Please continue treating Unit 14B exactly like any other apartment. No preferential treatment, but no targeted enforcement either. Just standard protocols." "Of course, Mrs. Winters." As Raj departed, I settled into one of the elegant lobby chairs with the inspection report, making myself visible in the main entrance where residents returning from work would pass by. The violations were legitimate. Andrew had installed an unauthorized smart thermostat system that interfered with the building's central HVS, accumulated multiple noise complaints from neighbors, and was storing his expensive mountain bike in the emergency stairwell rather than the designated storage areas. Right on schedule, Andrew strode through the lobby doors at 5:45 p.m., his attention focused on his phone. He nearly walked past, before registering my presence. "Mom?" He stopped abruptly, confusion evident on his face. "What are you doing here?" I closed the portfolio calmly. "Waiting for you, actually. I thought we might continue our conversation from last night." His expression darkened. "This isn't a good time. I'm dealing with a ridiculous situation with the building management. Some power-tripping inspector cited me for completely minor issues. Like storing your bike in the fire exit stairwell?" I asked innocently. Andrew's eyes narrowed. "How did you know about that?" "You mentioned lease violations in your voicemail," I reminded him. "It seemed like a likely issue, given your tendency to prioritize convenience over rules." He dismissed this with an impatient gesture. "The point is, they're suddenly enforcing obscure regulations that nobody follows. It's targeted harassment. Or perhaps it's consistent rule enforcement that you're not used to experiencing," I suggested mildly. "Because you typically expect exceptions." Andrew stared at me, genuinely baffled by this perspective. "Whose side are you on?" "I'm your son." "I'm on the side of fairness, Andrew. The same rules should apply to everyone, regardless of their perceived status or connections." Several residents passed through the lobby, nodding respectfully to Andrew. He clearly enjoyed being recognized, standing a little straighter, his expression shifting to one of casual importance. "Let's not discuss this here," he said finally. "Come up to my place." As we rode the elevator to the 14th floor, I considered how differently Andrew moved through the world compared to his father. Richard had commanded genuine respect through integrity, skill, and consistent treatment of everyone he encountered. Andrew cultivated the appearance of importance, adjusting his behavior based on what he thought people could do for him. In his apartment, Andrew immediately poured himself a whiskey without offering me anything. The inspection had clearly rattled him more than he wanted to admit. "I don't understand why you're here," he said bluntly. "Did you come to lecture me about following rules? Because that's rich coming from someone who can't even manage basic finances without help." The condescension in his tone strengthened my resolve. "Actually, I came to return these." I removed a set of keys from my purse. "They're the spare keys to the house that you took without asking. And to let you know I've changed the security code." Andrew blinked in surprise. "You're overreacting. I needed access to help organize Dad's things." "You needed to ask permission first," I corrected. "Just like you needed my permission before selling the car or listing Richard's tools for sale." "This is ridiculous," he muttered, draining his whiskey. "You're behaving irrationally. First the car, now the house keys. What's next?" "Next is a clear boundary," I said calmly. "You don't make decisions about my property, my finances, or my living arrangements without my explicit consent. Not because you're trying to help, not because you think you know better. My life, my choices." Andrew stared at me as if I'd started speaking a foreign language. This assertive, boundary-setting mother was completely unfamiliar to him. "Dad would be disappointed in how you're handling this," he said finally, reaching for what he clearly thought was his strongest argument. "He knew you'd need guidance." I touched the key pendant at my throat, drawing strength from it. "Your father believed in me more than anyone ever has. He trusted my judgment, my resilience, and my ability to manage whatever came my way." For a brief moment, uncertainty flickered across Andrew's face, the first crack in his absolute conviction that he understood his father's wishes better than I did. "Look, I know this is a difficult time," he said, his tone softening into something practiced and patronizing. "Grief makes people resistant to change. How about we table the senior living discussion for now and focus on smaller steps? Maybe a financial advisor to help organize Dad's pension and your accounts." I studied my son, this person I'd raised but somehow failed to instill with the values Richard and I had lived by. The realization was both painful and clarifying. Andrew wouldn't truly hear me until something disrupted his fundamental assumption of superiority. "I don't need a financial advisor," I said simply, "and I don't need you to manage my life. What I need is for you to address those lease violations before you jeopardize your housing situation." His expression hardened again. "So that's it? You came all the way here to throw this inspection business in my face and reclaim some house keys?" "No," I replied, rising to leave. "I came to establish boundaries and to suggest you might apply the same critical thinking to your own behavior that you're so quick to apply to building management. Rules exist for reasons, Andrew, even for people who think they're special." As I left his apartment, I felt neither triumph nor vindication, only a quiet certainty that I was finally standing in my own power, exactly as Richard had always seen me. The full revelation of my financial situation would come soon enough. But first, Andrew needed this lesson in perspective that no amount of money could teach. 3 days after the inspection, I received an unexpected visitor at my door. Andrew stood on the porch, looking uncharacteristically disheveled, his usual polished appearance replaced by casual clothes and an expression of genuine confusion. "We need to talk," he said without greeting. "Something strange is happening." I invited him in, noting the dark circles under his eyes and the nervous energy in his movements as he paced my small living room. "The building management company called me in for a meeting yesterday," he began. "Not just about the violations. Those are minor. I've already addressed them. This was different." He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture so reminiscent of Richard that it made my heart ache. "They're raising my rent by 30% when my lease renews next month." "That seems significant," I observed, keeping my expression neutral, despite knowing exactly why this was happening. Susan had consulted me about adjusting Andrew's artificially low rent to match market rates, a correction I had approved. "It's outrageous. I've been a tenant for 2 years. My unit isn't any different from when I moved in." He stopped pacing to look at me. "But that's not even the strangest part. When I tried to leverage my connections, mention the executives I know through work, the manager said something bizarre." "What did he say?" I asked, genuinely curious about Raj's response. "He said, ownership has specifically reviewed your situation and determined that market-appropriate rates should apply regardless of tenant connections or status." As if someone had specifically discussed me. Andrew's brow furrowed. "It feels personal, like someone's targeting me." The irony was almost painful. For the first time, Andrew was experiencing what so many others did, the impartial application of rules without special consideration for his perceived importance. And he found it not just frustrating, but incomprehensible. "Maybe it is personal," I suggested. "Maybe someone noticed how you expect preferential treatment and decided to apply standard policies instead." Andrew stared at me. "Whose side are you on?" "I came here for support, not criticism. I'm on the side of fairness." I repeated my words from our previous conversation. "Why should you pay less than your neighbors for the same apartment?" "Because that's how the world works," he exclaimed, exasperated. "It's about who you know, the relationships you cultivate. I've spent years building professional connections. And you think those connections should entitle you to pay less rent than someone without them? How is that fair?" He looked at me as if I were being deliberately obtuse. "Life isn't fair, Mom." Dad understood that. It's why he worked so hard to give us advantages. The mischaracterization of Richard's values sparked something in me. "Your father believed in earning what you received through honest work and treating people with equal respect regardless of their status. He never sought special treatment or advantages based on connections." Andrew scoffed. "That's why he remained a mechanic his whole life, instead of leveraging his skills into management or ownership. He lacked ambition." The dismissive assessment of Richard's life choices, spoken so casually in the home we had built together, crystallized exactly why this lesson was necessary. Andrew had completely lost sight of what truly constituted success and value. "Your father," I said carefully, "was exactly where he wanted to be, doing work he found meaningful and honorable. That you measure his life by his title or income says more about your values than his achievements." Something in my tone must have penetrated, because Andrew's expression shifted from dismissive to uncertain. He glanced around the modest living room with its comfortable but worn furniture, family photos covering the walls, bookshelves filled with well-read volumes. "I just want what's best for both of us," he said finally, his voice less certain. "A better life than this, financial security, status that opens doors. And you assume I don't have those things because they don't look the way you expect them to," I observed. "That says a great deal about how you measure worth, Andrew." He sank onto the sofa, suddenly looking exhausted. "I don't understand what's happening lately. First the car situation, then the inspection, now this rent increase. It's like the universe is conspiring against me. Or perhaps it's simply removing the special treatment you've come to expect," I suggested. "Showing you what life is like for people who don't believe they're entitled to exceptions." Andrew looked up sharply. "You've changed, Mom. Since Dad died, you're different. Harder, more critical." "Not harder," I corrected. "Clearer, about my boundaries, my values, and what I'm willing to accept from others, including you." An uncomfortable silence settled between us. For perhaps the first time in his adult life, Andrew was confronting the possibility that his worldview, where status trumped character and connections superseded rules, might not be universally shared or accepted. "So what am I supposed to do about the rent increase?" he asked finally. "I can afford it, but it's the principle of the thing. I've been a perfect tenant." "Except for the lease violations," I pointed out, "minor technicalities, which matter to the people responsible for safety and building management." I met his gaze steadily. "You have choices, Andrew. Pay the market rate like everyone else, find a less expensive apartment, or make a genuine case based on your actual tenancy record, rather than who you know." He seemed to truly consider this for a moment, before his expression hardened again. "This feels like I'm being taught some kind of lesson, and I don't appreciate it." "Sometimes life does that," I agreed. "Teaches lessons we didn't sign up for, but might need nonetheless." Andrew stood abruptly. "I should go. Clearly I'm not going to get the support I expected here." As he moved toward the door, he paused by the side table where a new framed photo stood, Richard in his workshop, surrounded by the tools Andrew had tried to sell, his face alight with the joy of creation and service. "Dad would have helped me with this," Andrew said quietly. "He would have made some calls, found a solution. Your father would have expected you to handle the consequences of your choices with integrity," I corrected gently, "and to consider that perhaps paying the same rent as everyone else is simply the right thing to do." After Andrew left, I sat in Richard's favorite chair, running my fingers over the worn armrests where his hands had rested for so many years. The conversation had been difficult but necessary, the first time I'd directly challenged Andrew's entitled worldview without hiding behind politeness or maternal accommodation. My phone buzzed with a text from Susan. "Tenant of 14B has requested a follow-up meeting to discuss rent adjustment. How would you like us to proceed?" I considered my options carefully. The easy path would be to reveal my ownership now, using financial power to force Andrew's respect. But that would teach him the wrong lesson. That money, not character, was what truly mattered. "Proceed with standard protocols," I texted back. "No exceptions, no special treatment, but document all interactions carefully." The more difficult path, allowing natural consequences to unfold while maintaining appropriate boundaries, would take longer and involve more discomfort for both of us. But if there was any hope of helping Andrew reconnect with the values Richard and I had tried to instill, it was the only viable approach. As evening settled over the house Richard and I had shared for decades, I felt his presence more strongly than at any time since his death. Not as a ghost or spiritual visitation, but as the enduring influence of a life well lived, one guided by principles rather than appearances, substance rather than status. "I'm trying," I whispered to the empty room, "to honor what you built, to stand in my own strength, and to help our son find his way back to what truly matters." No answer came, of course, but as I touched the key pendant at my throat, I felt a quiet certainty that I was on the right path, not just for myself, but for Andrew as well. The ground was shifting beneath his feet, challenging assumptions he'd held for too long. Whether he would find better footing or continue to stumble remained to be seen. "I think it's time," Margaret said, as we shared lunch at a small cafe near her office. A week had passed since Andrew's visit about the rent increase, a week of pointed silence from my son, broken only by a terse text informing me he would handle the rent situation himself and didn't need my input. "Time for what?" I asked, though I suspected I knew. "Time to stop the charade." She set down her fork with characteristic precision. "Andrew's had his initial lessons in consequence and perspective. If you wait too long to reveal the full truth, the deception itself becomes the issue rather than the behavior you're trying to address." I nodded slowly, acknowledging the wisdom in her assessment. "I've been thinking the same thing, but I want the revelation to be meaningful, not just shocking. I want it to illuminate the values Richard lived by, not just the assets he built." "Ooh, so what's your plan?" Margaret's eyes gleamed with interest. "Richard's tools," I replied, "the ones Andrew wanted to sell for quick cash. I think they hold the key to the right approach." After lunch, I drove to the bank where Richard had kept his safe deposit box. Using the key he'd left in his letter, I opened it for the first time. Inside were meticulously organized documents, property deeds, investment records, insurance policies, all carefully labeled and cross-referenced. Richard had been preparing this for years, creating a comprehensive system I could navigate without his guidance. But tucked among the legal papers was something unexpected, a small leather-bound journal with "For Evelyn" written on the cover in Richard's precise handwriting. I slipped it into my purse, saving it for a private moment. That evening, I sat in our bedroom and opened the journal with trembling hands. It wasn't a diary in the traditional sense, but rather a series of letters Richard had written to me over the years, documenting his thoughts about our life together, his hopes for Andrew, and most relevantly, the philosophy behind his quiet investment strategy. November 12, 2003. My dearest Evelyn, today I purchased the fourth property, the small apartment building on Maple Street. Andrew asked why I still waste time fixing other people's cars when I could move up to management. He doesn't understand yet that true value isn't found in titles or corner offices, but in work that matters and choices that reflect our deepest principles. Each property I buy is secured in your name through Winter Mechanics LLC, not for tax advantages or liability protection, though those exist, but because everything I build is meant for you, for us, to create freedom of choice rather than obligation to others' expectations. I hope someday Andrew will understand that wealth isn't meant to elevate us above others, but to eliminate the pressures that might otherwise force us to compromise what matters most. Money should purchase freedom to live by our values, not replace them with hollow status. All my love, Richard. Tears blurred my vision as I read entry after entry, spanning nearly 3 decades. Richard's voice reaching out from beyond death, affirming the very lessons I was now trying to teach our son. The final entry, dated just 2 weeks before his heart attack, hit me with particular force. April 3rd, 2023. My dearest Evelyn, the doctor's news today wasn't good. My heart is weaker than we thought. I've accelerated the final preparations, ensuring everything is properly structured for your security. Margaret knows what to do if things progress more quickly than we hope. I worry most about Andrew. He's built his identity on external markers of success while missing the deeper satisfaction of living with integrity and purpose. My greatest hope is that he'll eventually recognize what truly constitutes a life well lived, not accumulation or status, but contribution and character. My tools, the ones he's always viewed as just old equipment, represent this philosophy better than anything else I own. Each one has helped create something of value, repair what was broken, build what was needed. They're not just implements, but embodiments of the principles I've tried to live by. If I don't get the chance to show him this myself, perhaps someday you can help him see that the most valuable things I leave behind aren't properties or investments, but the example of measuring worth by contribution rather than acquisition. All my love, always, Richard. I closed the journal, Richard's final written words etching themselves into my heart. The revelation was both painful and illuminating. He had known his time was limited, had accelerated his preparations while shielding me from worry, and had held out hope for Andrew's eventual understanding of what truly mattered. The path forward crystallized with perfect clarity. Richard's tools would indeed be the key, not just as physical objects, but as embodiments of the values they represented. The next morning, I called Susan Chen with specific instructions regarding Andrew's upcoming rent negotiation meeting. Then I dialed Andrew's number. "Mom?" He sounded surprised to hear from me after a week of silence. "Is everything okay?" "Everything's fine," I assured him. "I was wondering if you could come by the house tomorrow evening. There's something important I need to discuss with you." "If this is about the rent situation, I've got it handled," he said, defensive edge returning to his voice. "I have a meeting with management tomorrow afternoon." "It's not about your apartment," I said truthfully. "It's about your father's tools." Confusion replaced defensiveness. "The tools? I thought you said they weren't for sale." "They're not, but they're more important than either of us realized. Please, Andrew, 6 o'clock tomorrow?" After a moment's hesitation, he agreed. I spent the next day preparing, carefully arranging Richard's workshop exactly as he had left it. Tools methodically organized on pegboards and in drawers, projects in various stages of completion positioned around the space, the small TV in the corner where he would watch baseball games while working on particularly long repairs. When Andrew arrived, I met him at the door, dressed not in my usual casual clothes, but in the crisp button-down shirt and jeans that had been my standard attire during the years I had worked alongside Richard in his shop before taking the hospital position. "Come in," I greeted him. "Thank you for coming." He followed me through the house with visible apprehension. "What's this about, Mom? Your message was pretty cryptic." "I want to show you something your father left," I explained, leading him toward the detached garage that had served as Richard's workshop for decades. "Something I think you need to see to understand recent events." The familiar scent of metal, oil, and wood greeted us as I opened the workshop door, the sensory signature of Richard's domain that brought an unexpected lump to my throat. Andrew paused in the doorway, his expression flickering with what might have been reluctant nostalgia. "Dad's shop," he murmured. "It looks exactly the same." "Because it matters exactly as it is," I replied, moving to the workbench where I had placed Richard's journal and a specific set of tools. "These tools aren't just implements, Andrew. They built our life together, paid for your education, maintained our home, served our community." Andrew shifted uncomfortably. "I know they meant a lot to Dad. More than that." I picked up a well-worn wrench, Richard's favorite. "This tool alone has probably generated tens of thousands of dollars over the years. Not through its resale value, but through its purposeful use in Richard's skilled hands." I gestured around the workshop. "Your father could have sold these tools years ago and taken a management position like you suggested. He had multiple offers, but he chose to remain a mechanic because he valued creation and service over status or title." Andrew's defensive posture softened slightly. "What does this have to do with whatever you wanted to discuss?" "Everything." I handed him Richard's journal. "Before you read this, there's something you should know, something that will change how you understand your father, our family, and recent events in your life." Andrew took the journal with visible confusion. "What are you talking about? Your father wasn't just a mechanic, Andrew. That was his passion and profession, but not his only skill." I took a deep breath. While working with his hands and charging fair prices that ordinary people could afford, Richard was also quietly building something else, something he kept private for specific reasons. Building what? Andrew's curiosity was clearly piqued, despite his desire to maintain emotional distance. "A real estate portfolio currently valued at approximately $4.7 million, I stated simply, "including, among other properties, Aspen Heights luxury apartments, where you live." The journal slipped from Andrew's suddenly nerveless fingers. I caught it before it hit the concrete floor. "That's not possible," he whispered. "Dad was a mechanic. We lived like this." He gestured around at the modest workshop. "We lived according to our values," I corrected gently. "Comfort without ostentation, security without status seeking, purpose beyond accumulation. These were choices, Andrew, not limitations." His eyes widened as understanding began to dawn. "You're saying Dad owned my building? That you own it now?" "Winter Mechanics LLC owns it," I confirmed. "A company Richard established 30 years ago, registered solely in my name from the beginning. The same company that owns 16 other residential properties and 3 commercial buildings throughout Denver." Andrew sank onto Richard's workshop stool, his worldview visibly crumbling. "The inspection, the rent increase, that wasn't coincidence." "No," I acknowledged. "After you sold my car without permission, I discovered what Richard had built for us, including the fact that you've been paying below-market rent in a building I own while suggesting I take the bus to work because I couldn't afford car insurance." The stark reality of his actions laid bare in this new context rendered Andrew momentarily speechless. I placed the journal gently on the workbench beside him. "This contains your father's thoughts about what he was building and why, his hopes for both of us, his concerns about the values you were embracing." I touched his shoulder lightly. "I'll give you privacy to read it. Take as long as you need." As I turned to leave, Andrew found his voice. "Mom, we'll talk after you've read it," I said quietly. "Some truths need to be absorbed before they can be discussed." I left him in the workshop, surrounded by the tools he had tried to sell. Tools that represented everything Richard had valued and everything Andrew had gradually dismissed in pursuit of status and appearance. The revelation was complete. Now, the more difficult work would begin, helping my son find his way back to the values that truly constituted his father's legacy.